Women's shelters exist for situations like yours, my daughter-in-law said while my suitcase sat on the front porch in the rain. My son stood behind her without saying a word. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I just stared at the yellow porch light reflecting off the wet driveway and realized something painful. They had not suddenly decided to throw me away that night. They had been slowly removing me from their lives for years.
I'm Evelyn Carter.
I'm 68 years old, and 3 years ago, after my husband Thomas passed away from a stroke, I gave my only son everything I had left. Every dollar from my retirement account. Every savings bond Thomas and I had carefully tucked away over 4 decades. Even the small emergency fund hidden inside an old coffee tin above the refrigerator. Ryan told me he had a dream. He wanted to build his own construction company outside Columbus, Ohio. He said he was tired of working for men who treated him like a number. I remember the way his eyes lit up that afternoon at my kitchen table. I can make this work, Mom, he told me. I just need one chance. And because I was his mother, because I still saw the little boy who used to run into my arms after Little League practice, I believed him without hesitation. I sold my small ranch house 2 months later. The same house Thomas and I bought in 1987 when interest rates were sky high and money was tight. The same house where Ryan took his first steps in the living room while snow fell outside the windows. I handed my son a cashier's check for nearly $200,000 and told him to build a better future than the one we had struggled through. At first, everything felt warm. Vanessa hugged me constantly and called me family every chance she got. They invited me over for Sunday dinners. Ryan insisted I move into their new home after the business began doing well. You shouldn't be alone anymore, he said. The house was beautiful. White brick. Black shutters. A long driveway lined with maple trees. It looked like the kind of home people photograph for Christmas cards. I truly believed my husband would have been proud. But slowly, almost invisibly, things changed. My favorite mug disappeared from the kitchen cabinet. The framed family photo Ryan once kept in the hallway was replaced with newer pictures where I no longer appeared. Vanessa started labeling shelves in the pantry with little notes that read private or do not touch. Tiny things. Small enough to question myself over. One evening during dinner, I reached for another piece of cornbread and Vanessa laughed softly. Careful, Evelyn, she said. At our age, carbs stick forever. Ryan chuckled into his plate without looking up. Another time, I overheard Vanessa on the phone with a friend. Honestly, it feels like living with a ghost sometimes, she whispered. She's just always here. I stood frozen in the hallway holding a basket of laundry, while my heart slowly folded in on itself. Still, I told myself families go through difficult seasons. I told myself not to be sensitive. But deep down, I think I already knew the truth long before the suitcase appeared on the porch. That night, rain soaked through my cardigan while Vanessa crossed her arms and avoided my eyes. We need privacy, she said flatly. Ryan works too hard to come home stressed every day. I waited for my son to say something. Anything. Instead, he rubbed the back of his neck and stared at the driveway. Maybe this is best for everyone, Mom, he murmured. Mom. Not Mama like he used to say when he was little. Just Mom. Cold. Distant. Like a stranger trying to sound polite. I looked past them into the house I had helped pay for. The hallway lights glowed softly against hardwood floors. I once helped Vanessa choose at Home Depot. The smell of garlic chicken still lingered from dinner. Everything looked warm inside that house except the people standing in front of me. Then I remembered something Thomas once told me shortly before he died. If anything ever feels wrong with Ryan's business, he had whispered from his hospital bed, talk to Margaret Ellis before you do anything else. At the time I thought grief had made him paranoid. Standing there in the rain with my suitcase beside me, I suddenly wondered if my husband had seen this coming long before I did. I drove for nearly 40 minutes that night. Before I realized I had nowhere to go. The rain had slowed into a cold drizzle, and the windshield wipers made a tired scraping sound every few seconds across the glass. My hands hurt from gripping the steering wheel too tightly. I kept thinking Ryan might call. I kept glancing at my phone sitting face up in the passenger seat. But the screen stayed dark. No calls. No messages. Nothing. By midnight, I pulled into the parking lot of a small roadside motel, outside Dayton with a flickering vacancy sign glowing red against the darkness. The clerk behind the counter looked no older than 22. He wore a faded Cincinnati red sweatshirt and smelled faintly like burnt coffee. He did not ask questions when I paid cash for 3 nights. I appreciated that more than he probably realized. The room smelled like old carpet cleaner and stale heat. There was a small microwave near the dresser, a television mounted crooked on the wall, and a floral bedspread that looked older than my grandson would have been if Ryan and Vanessa had ever decided to have children. I sat on the edge of the mattress for a long time without removing my coat. The silence felt strange. Not peaceful. Empty. Like I had fallen out of my own life. Around 2 in the morning, I opened my suitcase and carefully folded the damp clothes I had thrown inside before leaving the house. My toothbrush was still wrapped in the small hand towel from Ryan's guest bathroom. Guest bathroom. That was what Vanessa started calling it 6 months ago. It used to be my bathroom. Little things like that never happen all at once. They happen slowly, quietly, one word at a time, one look at a time, until suddenly you realize you no longer belong anywhere. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Ryan standing in the doorway with his hands shoved into his pockets while Vanessa spoke for both of them. The hardest part was not her cruelty. It was his silence. When Ryan was 7 years old, he used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms because he was afraid of lightning. He would wrap his tiny arms around my waist and whisper, "You will always keep me safe, Mama." Back then, I believed love worked in only one direction. Parents protected children. Children loved parents. I never imagined there would come a day when my own son would watch me stand in the rain holding a suitcase and choose comfort over loyalty. The next morning, I bought a cup of coffee from the gas station across the road and sat outside the motel watching 18-wheelers roll down Interstate 70 beneath a gray sky. Everything around me kept moving like normal. People filled their tanks. A man walked his golden retriever near the ice machine. Somewhere, families were eating breakfast together without realizing how fragile those moments really were. I reached into my purse looking for aspirin when my fingers brushed against an old envelope I had nearly forgotten about. My breath caught immediately. The handwriting on the front belonged to Thomas. I recognized it instantly. Steady, careful, familiar enough to still make my chest ache after 3 years. Written across the front in blue ink were 6 words I had never opened until that moment. For Evelyn. Only if necessary. I stared at the envelope for almost 10 minutes before opening it. My fingers trembled so badly I nearly spilled my coffee across the motel bedspread. Thomas had always written in blue ink. Even after 41 years of marriage, I could recognize his handwriting instantly. There was something steady about it. Calm. Reliable. The kind of handwriting that belonged to a man who paid bills early and never forgot anniversaries. For a moment, just seeing those familiar letters made me feel less alone. Inside the envelope was a single folded document and a business card attached with a paperclip. Margaret Ellis, attorney at law, downtown Columbus. Written underneath in Thomas's careful script were the words, "If Ryan ever forgets who sacrificed for him, she will help you." My chest tightened so suddenly I had to sit down again. I read the sentence 3 times. Then a 4th. Thomas knew. Somehow before he died, he saw cracks in our family that I refused to acknowledge. The document itself was filled with legal language I barely understood, but one phrase stood out clearly enough to make my stomach drop. Majority trust protection. I did not fully understand what it meant, only that Thomas had connected my retirement funds to Ryan's business in ways I never realized. Back then I trusted my son completely. I signed every paper Ryan placed in front of me without reading much beyond the highlighted sections. Vanessa used to joke that I was old school, because I still trusted handshakes and family promises more than paperwork. Now I wondered how often she laughed about that behind my back. I looked around the motel room at the faded wallpaper and weak morning light slipping through the curtains. Less than 48 hours earlier, I had been making chicken casserole in a $1 million kitchen, while Vanessa corrected the way I folded bath towels. The contrast felt surreal. One life had vanished so quickly I could barely process it. I picked up the motel phone twice to call Ryan, but each time I placed it back down. What exactly would I say? Ask him why he allowed his wife to treat me like a burden? Ask whether he remembered where the money for his company came from? Deep down, I think I already knew the answer that would hurt most. He remembered everything. He just chose himself anyway. Around noon, I drove to a small diner a few miles down the road because I realized I had not eaten since the previous afternoon. The waitress called me honey when she poured my coffee, and something about that simple kindness nearly broke me apart. I sat in the booth watching families come and go while old country music played softly overhead. Across from me, a young mother wiped ketchup off her little boy's face while he giggled and kicked his sneakers against the booth seat. I used to do that with Ryan after church every Sunday, back when his biggest worry was choosing between chocolate or vanilla milkshakes. I wondered when exactly children stopped seeing their parents as people. Maybe it happens so slowly nobody notices. A canceled phone call here. Forgotten birthday there. One day you are the center of their world. The next day you are standing outside in the rain with nowhere to go. After lunch, I drove to downtown Columbus with Thomas's envelope sitting carefully on the passenger seat beside me. Margaret. Ellis's office was located inside an old brick building near the courthouse. My heart pounded harder with every step I took toward the glass entrance doors. Because for the first time since Ryan threw me away, I had the uncomfortable feeling that my husband left behind more than memories. Margaret Ellis looked exactly the way I remembered her from Thomas's retirement party 8 years earlier. Sharp gray blazer. Silver hair cut neatly at her shoulders. Calm eyes that missed nothing. She stood when I entered her office and hugged me without saying a word. That alone nearly made me cry harder than anything that had happened since leaving Ryan's house. Because kindness feels different when you have spent days being treated like an inconvenience. Her office smelled faintly like old books and peppermint tea. Framed law degrees covered the walls beside photographs of grandchildren and fishing trips. Ordinary pieces of life. Stable pieces. The kind I suddenly missed more than I could explain. Margaret waited until I sat down before speaking. Thomas asked me to watch out for you, she said gently. I hoped I would never need to. Hearing my husband's name spoken out loud inside that office made my chest ache. Thomas had been gone 3 years, but some mornings I still expected to hear his footsteps in the kitchen. I still reached for the other side of the bed half asleep before remembering the silence beside me was permanent. Margaret opened a thick folder on her desk and slid several papers toward me. Do you remember signing partnership protection documents when Ryan started the company? She asked. I frowned slightly. I signed whatever Ryan said was necessary. Margaret nodded slowly, like she already expected that answer. Your retirement funds were not a gift in the legal sense, Evelyn. Thomas insisted they be protected through a majority trust structure connected to the company.
I stared at her blankly.
Legal terms always sounded cold to me. Distant. Like another language built for people with expensive watches and no time for emotion. Margaret folded her hands carefully. You technically control 51% of Carter Custom Homes. The room went completely silent. Even the ticking clock on her bookshelf seemed louder suddenly.
No, I whispered.
Ryan owns that company. Ryan manages it, Margaret corrected softly. But legally majority ownership remains tied to the trust Thomas created in your name. I leaned back slowly in the chair, feeling almost dizzy. Memories rushed through me all at once. Thomas sitting quietly at the kitchen table late at night reviewing papers after Ryan left. The worried expression he used to wear whenever Vanessa spoke too sharply about money. The way he once said, "Love makes people blind, Evelyn. Especially parents." At the time I accused him of being too suspicious. I defended Ryan immediately. Now shame settled heavily inside my stomach. Not because Ryan betrayed me. Because Thomas saw the possibility years before I ever could. Margaret slid another document across the desk. There is more, she said quietly. If the trust withdraws financial protection, several business loans become immediately vulnerable. I looked down at the paperwork but the words blurred together. You mean the company could fail? Margaret hesitated just long enough for me to understand the answer before she spoke it aloud. Very quickly. I felt sick suddenly. Not triumphant. Not powerful. Sick. Because despite everything Ryan had done, he was still my son. I remembered helping him build Pinewood Derby cars at the dining room table when he was 9. I remembered sitting through endless middle school basketball games just to watch him score 2 points all season and grin proudly anyway. Mothers do not stop loving their children simply because those children become selfish adults. That is the cruelest part. Margaret studied me quietly from across the desk. Thomas never wanted Ryan punished, she said carefully. He only wanted to make sure you could never be discarded. I lowered my eyes toward the papers in front of me while a painful truth settled into my chest. My husband protected me from a betrayal I refused to believe could happen. For the next 3 days, I moved through life like someone learning how to breathe again after nearly drowning. Every morning, I woke up inside the motel room. For a few confused seconds before remembering where I was. The old heater rattled constantly against the wall. Cars came and went outside my window at all hours of the night. Somewhere nearby, a freight train passed after midnight every evening with a low, lonely sound that echoed through the darkness. Strange how quickly people can adapt to discomfort when they realize they have no other choice. I stopped checking my phone by the second day. Ryan still had not called. Not once. Margaret offered to help me find a small apartment, but pride made me hesitate longer than it should have. At 68 years old, starting over feels humiliating in ways younger people cannot fully understand. Society expects older women to fade quietly into the background, to be grateful for scraps of attention, to avoid becoming inconvenient. I spent years trying not to inconvenience anyone, especially my son. On Thursday morning, I drove back toward the subdivision where Ryan lived because I realized I had left several photo albums behind in the basement closet. I told myself I only wanted the pictures. That was true. But another part of me wanted something far more painful. I wanted proof that my family still existed somewhere beneath all the coldness. The neighborhood looked exactly the same as always. Perfect lawns. White fences. Expensive SUVs parked neatly in polished driveways. The kind of place where people wave politely while secretly competing over kitchen renovations and property values. I parked across the street because suddenly I felt embarrassed for anyone to see my old Buick beside Ryan's luxury truck. I had just stepped onto the sidewalk when I heard voices drifting from the open garage. Vanessa was inside speaking to someone on speakerphone. Her tone sounded relaxed. Cheerful even. Honestly, once the Seattle deal closes, this place will finally feel like ours. She laughed softly. I told Ryan we waited too long already. Seattle. My chest tightened instantly. They really were planning to leave. And they never intended to take me with them. I stood frozen beside the mailbox while Vanessa kept talking. No, she is staying at some motel or something, she said. Casually. Ryan feels guilty, but he will get over it. He always does. I closed my eyes for one brief second because hearing those words hurt more than being thrown out. Not because Vanessa said them. Because she knew my son well enough to say them with confidence. She understood exactly who he had become. A moment later, Ryan walked into the garage. Did Mom call? He asked quietly. I held my breath without realizing it. Vanessa sighed dramatically. Ryan, you cannot keep doing this to yourself. She is an adult. She will figure something out. There was a long silence before he answered. I know. Just 2 words. No anger. No defense. No regret strong enough to matter. I backed away from the driveway before they could see me. My knees felt weak by the time I reached the car. Once inside, I locked the doors even though nobody was chasing me. Then I sat gripping the steering wheel while memories crashed over me one after another. Ryan at age 5 holding my hand crossing parking lots. Ryan at 16 hugging me after getting his driver's license. Ryan crying at Thomas's funeral while promising, "You will never be alone, Mama." Somewhere along the way, my son stopped seeing me as family and started seeing me as responsibility. And responsibilities are easy to discard once they become inconvenient. As I drove away from the neighborhood, my phone suddenly rang through the silence. Margaret's name appeared across the screen. The moment I answered, I heard tension in her voice for the first time since meeting her. "Evelyn," she said carefully. "Ryan's company just missed 2 major loan payments." The silence on the phone lasted long enough for me to hear traffic passing outside Margaret's office window. I pulled my car into an empty grocery store parking lot and turned off the engine while she explained everything slowly, carefully, like someone delivering news to a patient recovering from surgery. "Ryan expanded too fast," she said. "New equipment leases. Additional crews. Large development contracts. The company has been operating on borrowed cash for months." I stared through the windshield at shopping carts scattered near the curb while her words settled heavily. Inside me, Ryan always wanted people to think he was successful. Even as a teenager, he hated appearing behind anyone else. If another boy got a newer car or a better baseball glove, Ryan worked overtime trying to match it. Thomas used to say our son chased approval the way some people chase money. Back then it sounded harmless. Now it sounded dangerous. Margaret continued speaking. The lenders are beginning to review the trust protections connected to the company. Once they do, your signature becomes necessary for several restructuring agreements. My fingers tightened around the phone. And if I refuse? Another pause. Then the banks may freeze expansion funding almost immediately. I closed my eyes. Somewhere inside me, a strange battle had already begun. One part of me still wanted to protect Ryan from every consequence waiting for him. The same instinct that made me kiss scraped knees and cover late rent checks years ago still lived inside my chest. But another part of me felt exhausted in a way I could not explain. Tired of being useful only when someone needed rescuing. Tired of shrinking myself to make other people comfortable. Margaret's voice softened slightly. Evelyn, you do not owe loyalty to people who discarded you. I swallowed hard because hearing the truth out loud hurt more than the lies ever did. After hanging up, I sat alone in the parking lot for nearly 20 minutes while shoppers pushed carts through the cold afternoon wind around me. Ordinary life kept moving. A little girl begged her father for cookies near the entrance. An elderly couple loaded bags into a pickup truck while arguing gently about soup flavors. Simple moments.
Real moments.
Meanwhile, my own family felt like a house collapsing slowly from the inside out. That evening I returned to the motel and heated canned chicken noodle soup in the microwave while local news played quietly on television. I barely tasted the food. My mind kept replaying Ryan's voice from the garage. Did Mom call? Not is Mom okay? Not where is she staying? Just whether I called. Even his guilt revolved around his own comfort. Around 8 o'clock my phone buzzed unexpectedly against the nightstand. Ryan's name filled the screen. My stomach twisted so sharply I almost ignored it. But after the fourth ring I answered. For several seconds neither of us spoke. Then finally he cleared his throat awkwardly. Hey Mom. The word sounded fragile now. Careful. Like he was testing whether he still had the right to say it.
Yan.
More silence. I could hear muffled movement in the background.
Cabinet doors closing.
Vanessa's voice somewhere farther away. I have been worried about you, he said finally. I looked around the motel room with its stained curtains and flickering lamp and nearly laughed at the absurdity of that sentence. Worried people do not leave their mothers standing in the rain with suitcases. I am fine, I answered quietly. Ryan exhaled slowly. Mom, things are complicated right now. There it was. Not an apology. Not regret. An explanation. As though betrayal could somehow become reasonable if described carefully enough. Vanessa thinks some space will help everyone calm down. I stared at the faded carpet while disappointment settled deeper into my bones than anger ever could. Even now, he still spoke about his wife and himself as one unit. And me as the problem outside of it. Then his voice lowered slightly. Mom. There are some business documents the bank may need you to sign soon. Suddenly everything became painfully clear. After we hung up, I sat perfectly still on the edge of the motel bed with my phone resting quietly in my lap. The room felt colder somehow. Not because of the weather outside but because something inside me had finally shifted into place. Ryan did not call because he missed me. He did not call because he regretted watching his wife throw me out like unwanted furniture. He called because the business was falling apart. Because suddenly I mattered again. I looked toward the window where rain tapped softly against the glass and remembered all the times I defended him over the years. Every warning sign. Every selfish decision. Every moment Thomas looked disappointed while I insisted. He is under pressure. Or, he does not mean it that way. Mothers become experts at translating disappointment into excuses. We soften sharp truths until they barely resemble reality anymore. The next morning, I met Margaret at a small coffee shop near the courthouse. She arrived carrying a leather folder thick with documents while snow drifted lightly through the gray Columbus sky outside. The waitress recognized Margaret immediately and brought her coffee without asking. That told me everything about the kind of woman she was. Reliable people become familiar everywhere they go. Margaret waited until our drinks arrived before opening the folder. Ryan's lenders are requesting an emergency review, she explained quietly. Without your signature, they cannot refinance several outstanding loans. I stirred cream into my coffee slowly even though I no longer wanted it. How bad is it? Margaret hesitated carefully. Worse than he probably admitted. She slid several papers toward me. Profit projections. Loan balances. Equipment financing agreements. The numbers blurred together after a while, but one figure stood out clearly enough to make my chest tighten. Ryan's company owed more money than Thomas and I earned in 20 years of marriage combined. How could he let this happen? I whispered. Margaret removed her glasses slowly. Because success became more important than stability. And because Vanessa encouraged appearances they could not truly afford. Images flashed through my mind immediately. The luxury kitchen remodel Vanessa bragged about online. The expensive vacations. The oversized Christmas parties where she hired caterers instead of cooking herself. I remembered standing quietly in the corner one December while guests admired their home. Vanessa smiled proudly and said, "Ryan built all of this from nothing." I stood 3 feet away holding a tray of desserts while nobody acknowledged where the original money came from. Not even my son. Shame settled heavily over me again. But this time it felt different. Clearer somehow. Less confused. I was finally seeing my life without excuses wrapped around it. Margaret lowered her voice slightly. There is something else you need to understand, Evelyn. If you sign these new agreements, your personal trust becomes exposed to future liability. I frowned. Meaning if the company collapses later, you could lose nearly everything Thomas protected for you. The words landed hard. I stared down at my hands resting against the coffee cup. Wrinkled hands. Tired hands. Hands that spent 40 years packing school lunches, balancing grocery budgets, folding work uniforms, and sacrificing quietly so my family could stand taller. And now those same hands were being asked to rescue the very people who abandoned me. My phone buzzed suddenly against the table. Ryan's name appeared again. Margaret glanced at the screen but said nothing. I answered after the third ring. "Mom," Ryan said immediately, sounding more anxious than before. "The bank needs an answer soon." No greeting this time. No pretending to ask how I was doing. Just urgency. Fear. Pressure. I looked out the coffee shop window at strangers hurrying through the snow with scarves wrapped tightly around their necks, while my son waited desperately on the other end of the line. Then for the first time in weeks I stopped feeling guilty for surviving what they did to me. Ryan came to the motel 2 nights later. I knew it was him before I even opened the door because his truck sat crooked across 2 parking spaces outside like he had parked in a panic. Through the curtains I watched him step out into the freezing wind wearing the same navy coat Thomas bought him 3 Christmases ago. He looked exhausted. His shoulders slumped forward. His beard uneven like he had stopped paying attention to himself. For one brief moment my heart reacted before my mind did. I saw my little boy again. The child who used to wait by the front window every evening for me to come home from work. Then he knocked softly and reality returned. I opened the door but did not invite him inside immediately. Ryan glanced past me at the small motel room and something flickered across his face. Shame maybe. Or discomfort. It was difficult to tell anymore. "Mom," he said quietly. "Can we talk?" I stepped aside without answering. The heater rattled loudly while he entered the room, looking around at the faded furniture and tiny microwave sitting on top of the dresser. Noticed his eyes pause briefly on the grocery store soup containers stacked beside the trash can. He swallowed hard. "You have been staying here this whole time?" he asked. I folded my cardigan carefully across my lap before answering. "You told me to leave." Ryan flinched slightly at the words even though they were true. "I did not know Vanessa would go that far," he said quickly. "Things got heated." Heated. Such a small word for the moment your mother realizes she no longer has a home. I studied him quietly while silence filled the room between us. Ryan looked older than 40 suddenly. Not physically. Spiritually. Like stress had peeled something away from him piece by piece. He sat down heavily in the chair near the window and rubbed both hands over his face. "The company is in serious trouble," he admitted finally. "Worse than I thought." There it was again. Not "I hurt you." Not "I am sorry." Only business. Money. Consequences. I waited calmly while he continued talking. The banks are freezing new credit lines until the trust paperwork gets resolved. Payroll is due Friday. If this falls apart, 23 employees lose their jobs. His voice cracked slightly at the end, and despite everything, part of me still felt pain for him. Mothers do not stop worrying simply because they should. Ryan looked up at me with red, tired eyes. Mom, I know things have been difficult lately, but we can fix this. Vanessa and I were under pressure. We never wanted you to feel unwanted. I almost smiled at the cruelty hidden inside that sentence. Feel unwanted. As though my pain came from misunderstanding instead of actions. As though I imagined standing in the rain with my suitcase beside me while my own son looked away. I leaned back slowly against the motel wall and studied the man sitting across from me. Ryan, I said softly, did you know Vanessa planned to move to Seattle without me? The color drained from his face immediately. He looked down at the floor instead of answering. That silence told me more than any confession could have. He knew. Maybe not every detail. Maybe not every cruel word. But enough. Enough to stay quiet. Enough to let it happen. Something inside me settled completely in that moment. Not anger. Not revenge. Clarity. The painful kind that arrives too late to save a relationship but just in time to save yourself. Ryan's voice dropped almost to a whisper. Mom, please sign the papers. I looked toward the window where snow drifted beneath the motel lights outside, and realized my son still believed my greatest fear was losing him. He had not yet understood that I already had. Ryan stayed in the motel room for nearly an hour after asking me to sign the papers. Most of that time passed in silence. He sat near the window with his elbows resting on his knees while snow continued falling softly outside beneath the parking lot lights. I noticed he kept glancing around the room as though seeing pieces of my new reality for the first time. The thin towels hanging near the bathroom sink. The travel-sized shampoo bottles. The small stack of folded sweaters sitting beside my suitcase because there was no closet large enough to unpack properly. Tiny details. Humiliating details. Yet somehow none of them seemed to affect him as much as my silence did. Finally he spoke again. His voice rough with exhaustion. Mom, I know I failed you. I looked at him carefully because those words should have brought relief. Instead they only made me tired. Did you? I asked quietly. Ryan frowned slightly. What do you mean? I folded my hands together in my lap. You keep talking about the business falling apart. About banks. About payroll. But you still speak as though throwing me away was a mistake caused by stress. He opened his mouth to answer, then stopped. For the first time since entering the room, he looked uncertain instead of defensive. I continued softly. You did not fail me because money became tight, Ryan. You failed me because you stood there while your wife treated your mother like something temporary. His eyes dropped immediately toward the carpet. I remembered that habit from childhood. Whenever Ryan lied about breaking lamps or skipping homework, he always looked down first. Some things never change. Vanessa was angry, he muttered weakly. We were both overwhelmed. I nodded slowly because suddenly I understood something important. My son had spent so many years avoiding conflict that he no longer recognized cowardice when he heard it in his own voice. Protecting comfort became more important than protecting people. Do you remember your father's funeral? I asked unexpectedly. Ryan looked up, startled by the question. Of course I do. You held my hand after everyone left the cemetery, I said softly. You promised I would always have a place with you. His face tightened immediately. Pain flickered there this time. Real pain. But still not enough to undo what had already happened. I meant it, he whispered.
No, Ian suarad gently.
You meant it until it became inconvenient. The heater rattled loudly in the silence that followed. Outside, a snowplow pushed slush across the motel parking lot, while headlights passed along the highway beyond the trees. Ordinary winter sounds. Yet inside that tiny room, something permanent was ending between a mother and her son. Ryan rubbed both hands across his face again before speaking. What happens if you do not sign? I studied him carefully before answering because I wanted him to hear the truth without anger wrapped around it. Then the company probably collapses. He inhaled sharply. I could almost see calculations racing behind his eyes. employees, loans, reputation, the house, Vanessa, everything he built standing on the edge of disappearing. Mom! He began again, desperation creeping into his voice now. But I raised my hand gently and he stopped talking. Your father spent his whole life protecting this family, I said quietly. The difference is he never confused love with usefulness. Tears gathered in Ryan's eyes then, though he blinked quickly as if ashamed of them. I do love you, he whispered. For a moment I believed he thought that was enough. That love spoken softly could somehow erase abandonment. I stood slowly and walked toward the door before opening it to the freezing night air outside. Snowflakes drifted silently beneath the neon motel sign, while Ryan remained seated behind me. I hope someday you understand this, I said without turning around. A person should never have to lose everything before their family remembers they matter. Ryan stared at me for several long seconds before finally standing. He looked like a man carrying something too heavy to put down anymore. But some weights arrived too late to change the damage already done. Without another word, my son walked out into the snow, and this time I did not stop him.